Good morning, Inspector. Just to confirm, we are live on YouTube.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right, so the inquiry is resumed. Just to remind people about the procedure that those who are taking part can have their video screen on, and if you're not speaking, if you can be muted. Otherwise, everyone else is muted and screen off. And if you wish to speak, just raise your hand. However, it is a formal procedure, so there's a process of when people can speak, unless there's something very urgent that someone needs to raise. But anyway, what I'll do is I'll move on to the matters that have arisen. And first of all, I did receive a draft set of conditions, should I allow this. And I've had a look at those, so I've got a few comments, but anyway, there's some obviously that haven't been agreed, so they'll be going through, I assume, with some of the cross-examination and evidence in chief, maybe. But the other matter, there's Mr. Paul has asked whether he can give a statement to just summarise what's happened during the inquiry in terms of the points that he's been making. Are there any objections to him making a statement, either sending a written statement in or actually speaking? Anyone commenting on that? Mr. White.
Well, sir, I mean, I don't think the process normally expects a second go. Mr. Paul is not a Rule 6 party.
No.
So, I mean, I frankly go back to the point that I've reiterated again, that the appellant has the fundamental final right. I don't think it's appropriate after witness evidence has been given for a third party to come back and make commentary on it. I mean, it just runs the risk again of having a constant battle and rebattle about the evidence, frankly. Yeah, in almost every inquiry I do, the third parties go first and then the LPA and then the appellants give their evidence. And it's always the case that third parties often evidence has to be looked at in the light of they have gone first.
Yes, I can see that.
I mean, but it's fundamentally a matter for you. If you think it would assist you to have a statement from Mr. Paul, then obviously I would like it. I would like it a written statement that Mr. Ross can see and has the opportunity to comment on before he gives evidence.
Yes, I think that's going to be the case. Mr. Paul will be asking. Well, I think if Mr. Paul's here, he'll be asking questions of the next witness. He's got some questions he's put in. And yeah, Mr. Paul, hello, Mr. Paul. So what I thought I'd be happy for you to do is, you've got these questions that you've put forward for the drainage witness, Mr. Maynard, and by all means you can ask them. I think we'd have the same procedure as previous ones on these question and answer sessions, in which Mr. White, well, or whoever's going to, I think it's Mr. White, is it, on Mr. Maynard? Yes. So Mr. White will be calling Mr. Maynard and just going through his evidence briefly, and maybe even when he's doing that, try and address your questions that you've already put. So then that means that if there's anything that you feel hasn't been addressed, that you'd like to just ask, or when I say addressed, I mean, it doesn't have to be that you agree or not, but it's whether it's been dealt with by the witness. But if there's anything else you feel hasn't been responded to in your questions, then by all means you can ask those questions. And I would prefer if you've got, have you got a statement that you'd like to use, Mr. Paul, at this present time? Sorry, can you unmute yourself, please? Thank you.
Are you referring to a statement that you spoke about just a moment ago?
Well, you've said you'd like
this?
to make a statement on
Yeah.
matters that, but I'd like to remind you that on it making a statement, you can't introduce new evidence.
What I was hoping, and I'm just asking the question really, was reflecting on what I said at the beginning and what's happened during the inquiry, because I have taken a keen interest. I watched every session.
Oh yes, yes.
And I'm not going to comment on every session. Trust me. This is
no, it'd be a very brief comment then.
Purely on the points that I raised at the start, and that's all. I mean, it'll be extremely short, in form of a written statement or.
Well, what I'm right. When would you be able to provide that?
Well, obviously, I was going to wait a bit further down the road for the inquiry, because there's more to come, really, I guess. But
yeah, I think that the thing is that I would prefer to have it
right
at a time before Mr. White calls his final witness, so that he can try and address anything that may arise out of that. So if you can provide that, hopefully the end of today, is that possible?
Probably a bit of a tight schedule, because obviously I'm interested in what happens today. But I mean, if
yes,
I can,
but by tomorrow, then
if I can do it
you
tomorrow,
provide it by tomorrow?
Yes, I will. Should I send that through to Leanne Palmer?
Well, I think the best procedure is to send it through to the program officer, which is Caroline Williams.
Okay.
And she will pass it on. I think it's best to focus everything through Caroline Williams at this stage. Otherwise, we lose track of what documents have been put in at the inquiry and everything. So
that's absolutely fine.
So if you can do that, and then that should be passed on to Leanne Palmer, and she should then let me and the other parties have a copy of it. But in fact, I mean, Caroline Williams should be able to distribute it anyway as an inquiry document.
That's absolutely fine. I'm very
right.
grateful for that.
So you can, but to be provided by tomorrow, then Friday, the 18th. Right. And like I say, I just want to remind you that you can't introduce new evidence at this stage, or if you do, it's liable to make the whole inquiry longer, and and it could end up with, I mean, I'm not expecting anything anyway from, I mean, I won't necessarily be able to admit it if there is new evidence anyway.
No, so, it certainly won't be new evidence. It's not new evidence.
Right. Okay then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. So what I'll do, is there anything else that anyone wants to raise before I hand over to Mr. White?
So can I raise a couple of points, just housekeeping? I'm instructed that good progress is being made on the 106 and further negotiations have been undertaken. We'll try and update you before we rise tomorrow. But can we update you before we rise tomorrow? In a perfect world, we'll have a version to show you. That might not be possible before Monday, as I understand it, but just rest assured that there's a huge amount of discussion going on behind the scenes between the respective parties to try and reduce as much as possible. So those are my instructions. And the other thing, I don't know whether you've seen it, but I'm told there is an itinerary for the site visit, which is doing the rounds, and hopefully, again, we should get agreement on that. I think, my understanding, I hope this is right, that it's might be being sent to some of the third parties for their comment and make sure they're content with it, and it shows you will see everything that they want you to see. But just rest assured that's also in progression.
Right, thank you. I'll next hand over to Mr. Howard Williams, who put his hand up first. So,
yeah, thank you very much, sir. Just in relation to those 2 points, on the 106, I can confirm and agree that there are discussions continuing, but again, I put in the cautionary note. I can't subscribe to wholly to the word good, in particular in relation to the triggers for community facilities and sports. The appellant, I hope it's fair to say, has been referring to these, you remember, even during the inquiry, but so far nothing tangible, and that provides increasing concern for us. So far as the second is concerned, the itinerary, yes, good progress, I understand, is being made on that. Thank you, sir.
thank you. And Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I'd just like to make you aware that third parties, which revolves around the community representatives, will this weekend will be looking at producing a map of features that they would like to point out to you during the site visit. If I may have permission to send to all of you on Monday with a map showing a key of the individual features to make it easy for you to see exactly what we would wish to point out.
Yeah, can you coordinate that with the programme officer?
I certainly can.
And then that will be passed on to the appellant and council, and then hopefully something can be agreed on the whole itinerary then to include those points.
I will certainly do that. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Right, thank you, Councillor. Anything else that anyone wants to raise? So in that case, I'll hand over to Mr. White to call his witness, Mr. Maynard, on drainage, I think. Isn't that right? Yes.
So you after 7 days, your bearings are right. Can I call the appellant's penultimate witness, who is Mr. Maynard? And for the purposes of this evidence, sir, could you please take up Mr. Maynard's proof of evidence, which I think is CD 7.15.
Yeah.
Mr. Maynard, could I please introduce you to the inquiry? And for the purposes of doing that, could we go to your section 2, where you set out your qualifications and experience? You are the managing director of RSK Land and Development Engineering, who are a firm of consulting engineers. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
You are a chartered engineer and a member of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and you practice as a chartered engineer in private practice in the property development industry for 42 years.
Yes, that's correct.
You're responsible for managing now all the civil, structural and hydrology activities of the business, and in particular you advise on strategic areas of development, including flooding and drainage.
That's also correct.
You prepared in the course of your professional life numerous flood risk assessments and the drainage strategies for residential, mixed residential, commercial schemes, which have ranged in size from large detached properties to mixed use schemes, which are major in excess of 5,000 units.
Yes.
And you and your team prepare approximately 70 flood risk assessments per year in support of planning applications for residential projects, of which geographically in the last 5 years you've done work in Kent, Surrey, Hampshire, West Sussex and East Sussex.
Yes, that's correct, sir.
You've also, in more locally, you've advised in Ashford, you were involved in the former barracks at Repton Park and the evolution and development of a 1,300 unit residential scheme.
Yes, that's correct.
And you were also there, you negotiated in that context with the local lead flood agency and Ashford Borough Council to provide an enhanced SUD solution.
Yes.
And just to give the inspector context, RSK now is the largest privately owned UK environmental and engineering company, and you have more than 8,000 staff.
Yes, that's accurate.
Right. Could I just ask you, just to set the context, we've got to deal principally, we're going to deal with 5 topics which are set up nicely in your section 6, the potential for on-site flooding, the potential for off-site flooding, the proposed surface water design, what will be the effect of climate change and foul drainage. Could I just, because I think you deal with those all in your executive summary, could you please read from 1.5 to 1.10 of your executive summary?
Yes, I can do that. Starting with 1.5, the lead local flood authority, EA Southern Water, didn't raise any objections to the planning application. However, Southern Water and the lead local flood authority recommended planning conditions if the appeal is granted. The existing ditches crossing the site will be retained within the master plan to ensure existing surface water and land drainage routes are maintained. The ditches will be enhanced by removing obstructions and raising their banks to reduce the risk of bank overtopping. The flow capacity of the existing Appledore Road culvert and surface water sewers will be restored by removing blockages and repairing pipes. In accordance with Ashford Borough Council's Sustainable Drainage SPD, the flows from the development areas will be controlled to replicate the existing surface water runoff from the Greenfield site. This will mitigate the impact of the additional impermeable areas on surface water flows from the development areas. Consequently, the flows from the development areas will be reduced by 72% during a 1 in 100 year storm event. The on-site SUDS drainage features, including the storage basins, swales, and permeable paving, will safely retain the excess surface water runoff before it can be discharged after the storm. The storage capacity can accommodate a 1 in 100 year plus 40% climate change event, with an additional allowance of 10% to allow for urban creep, which covers permitted development rights. The culvert repairs and control of surface water runoff from the site will reduce the risk of flooding on and off site. Finally, the foul drainage from the site will be connected into the Southern Water public sewer in Appledore Road. However, because there is limited capacity in this sewer, only the first phase of homes can be occupied until Southern Water carries out off-site reinforcement works. Southern Water anticipates that these works could be implemented within 24 months.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maynard. Can I just ask you a few supplementary questions?
Yeah, sure.
Please? The first one is in relation of RSK's involvement. What studies have been available to RSK in order to establish existing drainage regime and the existing flooding that's affected the appeal site?
So a site-specific flood risk assessment was prepared by RSK in accordance with the MPPF, and it includes a comprehensive assessment of flood risks from the various sources. This is reported in section 7 of core document 110. The assessment was based on a desk study review of published details we obtained from the Environment Agency and from the Ashford Borough Council Strategic Flood Risk Assessment, which is core document 2.26. It's also based on consultations with Ashford Borough Council, Kent County Council, the Environment Agency, Southern Water, site surveys, residence evidence, anecdotal evidence, and intrusive investigations. I concluded the site is in flood zone 1, where in any 1 year, the risk of fluvial flooding is less than 1 in 1,000. Hence, the site is suitable for residential development. In addition, on most of the site, the surface water flood risk from overland flows is also less than 1 in 1,000, except in localized low-lying areas along ditches and on the southwest boundary of the site.
Thank you. Then the next thing is just to deal with, yes, the conditions at this site. One of the issues one of the repeated concerns of local residents has been that there potentially are subjective conditions at the site that might affect the engineered solution. What's your view about that?
Well, sir, my view is, whilst all projects require bespoke assessments, in my experience, the flooding challenges on this site can be resolved using solutions which have proved effective on many previous developments. This is an ideal project for the adoption of green suds features that I'm proposing, because much of the site will remain undeveloped parkland as part of the application, and hence there is extensive space for suds.
Thank you. Then the next point, can we look at the future, please? And first of all, in relation to your design solution, have you or have you not taken into account the effects that climate change will bring about?
So we certainly have taken into account climate change. The impact has been rigorously assessed in accordance with the NPPF and its associated PPG, which is more onerous than local Ashford Borough Council policy, which recommends only a 30% allowance for climate change over baseline conditions, compared to the NPPF, which recommends 40%. And it's the 40% that we've used, which at the time of the change of policy to 40% in the NPPF covered a 100-year period from 2015. So it will take us to the forecast climate change impacts to the year 2115.
Thank you. Now, also looking at the future, as a result of the work that you've done and the modelling you've done, what are the potential flooding impacts and likelihood on the site post-development?
So the flood impacts on site are mainly due to ponding in the low-lying areas, as I said, on the southern boundary. This ponding occurs due to surface water runoff from the site, which collects in these poorly drained areas for three reasons. The infiltration is negligible on this site due to the low permeability of the subsoil, which is predominantly clay. Secondly, the blockages in the Appledore Road surface water culvert reduce its capacity, leading to backing up into the culvert alongside Rose Cottage, Limes Close. This could lead to ponding on the site at the upstream end of the culvert whilst water is delayed discharging into the culvert. Thirdly, there are blockages in the Southern Water public surface water sewer in the garden of number 15 Appledore Road. This reduces the capacity for flows entering from the ditch crossing the southwest corner of the site, which carries flows from the Southern Water sewer to the north, which enters the site under property known as Corinda on Woodchurch Road. Again, this leads to ponding in this area of the site and in the rear garden of number 15.
Do you mean 15?
Yeah, it's 13, 15 that are next door properties. The Southern Water sewer is actually in number 15.
Thank you. So to summarise, how will the development affect the risk of flooding externally and internally?
So my strategy for draining the development will ensure there will be a reduced risk of flooding post-development, both on the site and in the surrounding area. This is because flows from the developable catchments will be restricted to a maximum of 4 litres a second per hectare using a flow control device, and the excess water will be stored on site during heavy rain. Consequently, I've estimated the runoff from the development will be 72% less than it would be now during a 1 in 100-year storm. The existing ditches will be maintained and enhanced to manage the surface water flow routes through the site, including the inflows from Woodchurch Road, and will prevent the risk of property flooding.
Thank you. Now, obviously, always a lot of third-party concerns relate to, it's all very well on plans and maps and reports saying how things will work. What is your judgment based on your 42 years as to whether what is currently designed will actually be effective in reality? What's your view on that?
my team and I, sir, have carried out extensive collaboration with the lead local flood authority, the Environment Agency and Southern Water, who didn't raise any objections to the planning application. They also agreed with us that the submitted design and supporting documents would provide the basis for a robust drainage solution, which will prevent on-site flooding and reduce the risk of off-site flooding. However, to ensure the design is delivered in accordance with these details, Southern Water and the lead local flood authority recommended planning conditions, which are acceptable to the appellant if the appeal is granted. I've designed SUDs using similar features on many sites, and there have been no flooding or drainage defects which have required us to redesign any of these projects, at least over the last 5 years.
Thank you. Now, can we just, I don't think you need to take up, but just for the inspector's notes, would you just please note in the overarching statement of common ground, and I'm sure you've noticed this, but as a result of further discussions with Kent, it's at 616 of the statement of common ground that there were in the autumn of last year, post the committee consideration, further discussions with Kent Flood and Water, and as a result, they're no longer raising objections, which is CD 4.29, and also the council agrees, subject to you imposing the conditions which have been updated from Kent, that reason of refusal 7 is withdrawn. So we started off, Mr. Maynard, with a reason of refusal relating to the drainage proposals and potential flooding, and as a result of further information and negotiations, that reason's now withdrawn.
That's correct.
And then we also know 6.17.1 in relation to the foul water drainage that Southern Water made their comments, and again, the point you've already alluded to, subject to certain conditions being attached, they would not raise objections.
That's correct too.
Thank you. So let's just, can we park the discussions with the statutory consultees, and can we just deal, then can we move on? And could I ask you to deal, Mr. Paul very helpfully has provided his concerns and effectively. So I don't know if it's worth you effectively, well, can I just ask you basically to summarize? Mr. Paul raised a number of questions, so I don't know if you've got those in front of you.
Yes, I've got the questions in front of me, and I've made some notes on how I will answer those.
Well, yes, I just wanted to check with the inspector. So do you have those in front of you, Mr. Paul's flood?
Yes, I've got them, yes.
Okay, right. Mr. Maynard, then could I just ask you to deal with basically the surface drainage network concern, effectively in the separation from the ditch network, which forms the fundamental concern articulated in question 1. What do you say to that?
Well, I think question 1 talks about flooding at the eastern end of the Ribbon development in Appledore Road. Now, whilst there's evidence of flooding at the rear of 3739 Appledore Road, this has been specifically mentioned in my proof at paragraph 428, and you'll find there's a reference to this in paragraph 6.1.10 in my evidence. I've explained that to the west of tree 313, there's a low area in the valley feature occupying this part of the site. It's because there's no drainage along the boundary of 3739 that surface water runoff from the site collects, causing ponding during and after heavy rainfall. The development in the valley to the north will divert 80% of the runoff from this area via the controlled drainage and subsystem. Consequently, the source of the overland flows which cause the ponding will be reduced to 20% of the existing catchment. And essentially the water that falls on that area, it's not going to collect the surface water runoff that it used to. from the valley to the north.
Can I just ask,
Certainly, sir.
is this the area where there's a tree that's going to be trying to be avoided?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
sir. Tree 313 and its
Yeah.
root protection area.
Yeah. So is that going to make any significant effect on your drainage proposals to try and alleviate this problem?
So in consultation with Mr. Jones, the arboricultural expert, we revisited the swale feature, a SUDS feature, which actually was offset 1 metre from Mr. Jones' assessment of the root protection area. But in order to ensure that if the root protection area were extended to its worst case extent, we looked at the swale and the impact of terminating that a further 10 metres from the tree. So therefore 22 metres from the trunk of the tree. And Mr. Jones, I think in his evidence, presented details of how that swale would be curtailed. I looked at the capacity of the SUDS feature, and that particular swale had been extended to provide biodiversity. So the capacity lost is insignificant and doesn't reduce the capacity of our SUDS system to retain the 1 in 100 plus 40% climate change event. So in answer, no, it doesn't change. We modified the SUDS feature, but it doesn't change what I'm saying.
Right, thank you. Thank you. I've got Mr. Poole wants to raise his hand, but can you wait, Mr. Poole, until you've got a chance to ask your questions? I'm asking them at the moment, but you'll be able to have a chance after Mr. White has examined his witness first, and then you'll be able to ask anything that you feel hasn't been covered. But can you wait then, please, Mr. Poole? Thank you. Right, Mr. White, thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, Mr. Mayor, can we then please then deal with the question about the water flows along the north-south ditch? And well, I think probably you've answered that. Is there anything else you want to say about the concern, which obviously, understandably, Mr. Poole has about the area to the north of Rose Cottage, which is obviously his property? Is there anything else, or do you feel you've?
Well, I think it's worth explaining that I can understand why Mr. Poole raised the question based on Kent's letter. So there are KCC's concerns was specifically related to the ditches that convey the off-site contributing flows, and making sure that we kept those separate from the on-site drainage system. So it was the concern about making allowance for the off-site flows that was the reason behind Kent wanting to separate the drainage. The north-south ditch along the hedgerow actually only serves the development site area. It doesn't pick up any flows from off-site. So that's the key difference. So therefore, we've provided control and attenuation of the flow from that ditch, which on my estimation will reduce the peak flow from that ditch, which was uncontrolled previously, to approximately 45% of its current flow in a 1 in 100 year storm event. So that's the only addition I'd like to make, really.
Thank you. Right, can we then please deal with the third issue, and that is fundamentally the overarching point about how will the SUD system work on site?
Yes. Just
Well, actually, before we deal with that, Mr. Mayor, let me just give context. I mean, on the residential schemes you've identified, how often or not do residential schemes at the current time employ the use of a SUDS feature or features?
these features are virtually every development we work on will have these features. I think the benefit on this particular, on the appeal side, is that there's so much space to incorporate green open SUDS features, which are actively encouraged by policy.
But SUDS, I mean, just tell me, because you're no doubt you read various journals that are open to your profession. I mean, things go in and out of vogue. Can you tell the inspector, I mean, are SUDS features still credible, still endorsed by the profession generally, or is there a counter movement that maybe they've had their time and there are other forms and ways of dealing with drainage on the site?
SUDS are very much at the forefront of design, and our approach, and sometimes our clients present us with schemes which are designed already, and then we have to retrofit the SUDS into the design. This development has had a high level of collaboration all the way through to incorporate the SUDS in the master plan, and there's been a high level of discussion between all the consultants and the clients to ensure that they're properly integrated.
Thank you. Can I then please deal with the next issue, which is a concern about the culverts, that the culvert repairs necessary in Appledore Road, and how those will be carried out, and effectively what the proposal is likely to have by way of condition or not to deal with that issue. What do you want to say about that, please?
All I can say really on this matter, sir, is that the appellant will be designing the on-site drainage in accordance with the proposed planning conditions. This will ensure that the flows from the development, as I've said earlier, will be 72% less than they currently are in a 1 in 100 year probability event. Hence, there'll be a reduction in flows from Limesland into the Appledore Road drainage systems, both the culvert and the southern water sewer. And consequently, the risk of flooding will be reduced.
Thank you. Right, can we then please deal with this, the issue about the flows off-site to the surface water drains? And effectively, Mr. Paul wants to know what guarantees can be done that about the surface water drains and the flow rates will be. What guarantees can you give, frankly?
Well, sir, KCC in their role as lead local flood authority will provide independent verification that the flows from the development site will not exceed the existing runoff from a storm, with a 1 in 2 chance of occurring in any 1 year, which equates to the flow that I mentioned earlier of 4 litres a second per hectare. The proprietary flow devices proposed will be inspected by the management company in accordance with a published SUDS maintenance schedule, which will be subject to approval by KCC under the proposed planning condition. These devices don't have any moving parts and hence will require very low maintenance. They're essentially, the devices are like the plug hole in your bath. They set up a circulating flow which actually restricts the discharge through a larger hole than theoretically volume of water could get through. So that's how they work effectively.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Paul has a concern, obviously, if as a result of planning permission being granted, there is then flooding from the site to the adjacent properties, and obviously, understandably, his principal concern is to the owner of his cottage and his daughter's house. if there be flooding as a result of the development, effectively, will the appellant indemnify the owners? What's the position as you understand it?
Well, the appellant, sir, will be responsible for implementing the SUDs in accordance with the approved detailed design at the appropriate reserved matters stage. And the appellant will also be responsible for the operational management and maintenance of the on-site SUD system. That's all I can say about that question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Maynard. Please wait there for Mr. Paul's questions. Thank you, sir. That's my examination in chief.
Right. Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Paul, I think Mr. White tried to ask your questions. So is there anything that you feel that you need to follow up on that you're not, that you don't feel has been answered? I'm not saying that whether you agree or not, but whether you feel as though you haven't got the answers. There's something that hasn't been responded to.
No, if I can come in then. To be honest, I think, you know, what's been provided is a very comprehensive look at what I've asked. But can I just say at the outset that obviously my concerns are not to do with the associated wider issue of the planning permission or the appeal. I'm not representing Lyme's Land Protection Group on this issue. These are
right, you're not. No.
Okay.
These are I wasn't sure who you were representing on these. So these are your personal questions, and so really the response that you've got from your questions, I know you might not agree with them, but you feel that they've been responded to.
Obviously I tried to deal with these issues through KCC. I asked questions on emails in December and in January, and I got no response. So
this is from KCC. I mean, I assume that KCC might be busy on other things, but
I appreciate
their role as the.
I just felt it was best to go through the person who was dealing with it at the sharp end, if you like, and that was Mr. Maynard. I'm grateful for that. I've just got only one real point. I mean, obviously,
sorry, Kat, when you say a point, I prefer it, if you're going to do this, to ask questions of Mr. Maynard. That's the main reason for this.
Well, it is a question. The SUDS feature on the southern boundary, which has now been shortened, when it was originally designed, it was obviously much longer and went to the back of our property. Many of the photographs that I've shown, hopefully that you've seen via Kent County Council, of the flooding, and they're also on my photo library that I sent to the inspector at the beginning, just show the sense of where the water is, and it's behind our property. Our pond acts as a SUD system at the moment, because if it overtops, as you said, in your terms, for water, it overtops into our pond, and there's an overflow from our pond. And I think in your statement you said that would be addressed in the design. So I'm asking for that. But the point I wanted to make was that swale was much longer, and it was behind our property. It obviously impacted the tree, which then meant that it's been shortened. But as it was put in as a critical hydrological feature at the outset, how can it be shortened and then still have the same effect in terms of our property? Are you with me? Because it's right behind our property. That's where the water. Do you understand why?
I do understand. I tried to explain, Mr. Paul, what we've done there. Maybe I can just elaborate a bit more. You're quite correct. It was shown as a critical hydrological feature, a word that we struggle to say. But the end of the swale that we're removing was actually going to be extremely shallow, probably only 600 millimeters deep. So the capacity loss was really small there. So we were able to reduce it. So it was really there originally as I tried to say, as an ecological enhancement. And it was shown on the critical hydrological features plan because the rest of the feature, the major part of the feature, is critical, but that bit was part of it. So that's why it was shown on the plan. What I didn't explain just now was a bit about how we think that during the detailed design, we'll be able to manage the flooding that happened, the residual flooding. I've tried to explain that because we're controlling the water from the valley, most of it, and you'll only be left with, say, 20% of the ponding that you had before. We think that we can direct any exceedance flows, which I think was one of the questions you raised, via the road system, so that it won't flow into your property. Because we're in the bottom of the valley there, we can configure the road alignment so that we can drain the water essentially.
So when you say the road system, you mean the one that's going to be for the new development?
Yes, sir. The new
road system.
The new road immediately to the north of
Mr.
Paul's property and the tree we're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
And we can deal with the overland flow so that it will discharge into the Suds feature, which will discharge to the west and out of the site via number 11 and 13 Appledore Road. So that feature shouldn't have any exceedance flow that enters the land at the rear of your property. But yes, as you said, we would like to ensure that we manage your overflow from your pond as part of the detailed design.
Okay. I'm perfectly happy with what's been said. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for that information.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Like I say, if you can then just summarise your follow-up statement by tomorrow, then if you'd like to put something in,
I will. I'll make it very short.
Right. Thank you.
I'm very grateful. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there anything that Mr. White wants to come back on, or is that?
No, thank you very much, sir.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Maynard and Mr. White.
Thank you, sir.
So what I'll do is I'll have a short adjournment, and then it's up to Mr. Howell Williams to call his final witness, I think. Right. So I'll adjourn until 10:30.